Welcome back to Piratical History, and we're looking at the life of Henry Every. After they had taken the Fatah Muhammad, a couple days later, they would come upon the Ganj-i-sawai, which was a 2,600-ton ship, I believe, if memory serves me correctly. It would have men with 800 muskets on hand to take on the Fancy. So you had the Ganj-i-sawai with 81 guns, I believe, against the Fancy with 46. So the Fancy would come up, they would, more with the Ganj-i-sawai and start fighting for a couple of hours. Over the course of a few hours, the Fancy would prevail over the crew of the Ganj-i-sawai, and things started going pretty bad for the folks on the Ganj-i-sawai. Kafi Khan, the historian, showed that Every's men were very brutal to the prisoners on board and took some of the women and took liberties with the women, and other women who saw what was happening, instead of being raped in front of their husbands, they would commit suicide so their husbands wouldn't have to sit there and watch what would happen. It was just debauchery over the next few hours, and it's believed that Every took the Grand Mughal's daughter captive and would take her back to Madagascar. The loot that they would take from the Ganj-i-sawai total between 200,000 and 600,000 pounds. I think that was in their time. Nowadays, that'd be a few $1,000,000. This is probably one of the, if not the richest prize taken by a pirate in all of the golden age of piracy and the few years before. In November of 1695, they would sail towards Reunion there in the Indian Ocean after they had taken the Ganj-i-sawai, and Every would divvy up the loot among the crew. Each member of the crew were paid about 1,000 pounds, roughly 100,000 pounds of money. I think it'd be about $200,000. And the events that took place on the Ganj-i-sawai made the men marked men. After some arguing among the crew as to where to go, some of the Danish and French would stay there in Reunion, while the others would go with Henry Every around the Cape of Good Hope and towards the Bahamas, because the governor of the Bahamas was a friendly sort towards pirates. News of the actions of the crew of the Fancy reached India before it did London, and it caused riots within Surat. And the people in Surat would focus all their energy on the East India Company, and the locals would label all Englishmen as pirates and also infidels. They were labeled infidels from the Grand Mughal. He closed the English, Dutch, and French factories there in Surat and ordered an attack on Bombay because they were going for blood. They wanted revenge for what happened to the Grand Mughal's fleet heading towards Jeddah and eventually to Mecca on their yearly Hajj. Well, here's where an interesting person would come into play. Samuel Annesley was the East India Company's head man there in Bombay, and he worked some magic in preventing an armed assault on Bombay by promising the emperor that the East India Company would compensate him for his financial losses, and he also promised that the future pilgrim ships would be convoyed by the East Indian Company. Well, the Mughal promised to spare the Bombay, but no Indian trade would happen until Every was hanging in chains. On a side note, it appears that Annesley used this incident that Every had caused to kind of gain his own power and start setting the East India Company up as independent from the British. So they're kind of creating their own little government, their own little side quest, I guess you could say, and establish themselves as a power player in India and kind of undermine what the British were doing in the country. And I guess it's one of those statements where you don't let a good crisis go to waste. This caused the English crown to put Every on trial in absentia in 1696. And after a second trial, they convicted him and started the largest manhunt in English history. They were going to try and track down Every and bring him to justice, especially since all the ruckus he had caused there in the Indian Ocean. The government printed stories trying to turn the tide of opinion against piracy and tell citizens that the eventual end of pirates is the hangman's noose. Burgess talks about this in one of his papers, that this is kind of one of the big propaganda pushes that you see from a trial, especially being tried in the papers and also tried among the colonies, to try and tell people, hey, if you're going to harbor pirates, this is on you. We're going to come after you, and we're going to set the story straight one way or another. It was believed that Every fled to the more favorable confines of the American colonies, and King William put the colonies on notice that they should not harbor pirates, as I just said. Sometimes I repeat myself. Meanwhile, the Ballad of Henry Every was being published and distributed throughout the nation, reinforcing Every's status as a folk hero among the people. He was one of the many Red Sea raiders that were basically, finding revenge for all the Englishmen that were taken as prisoners and slaves among the Moorish and Muslim ships. The only people who were caught were a few of Every's crew who tried to land on the coast of Ireland. It looks like be about 8 people who were caught, and according to Burgess, this caused 2 reactions: contempt from the government and putting Every into folk hero status. In March of 1696, Every lands in the Bahamas and was welcomed by Governor Nicholas Trott, and on October 1696, 6 of Every's crew were put on trial before the Admiralty Court, and the first trial wound up being they were all acquitted of their crimes. The Admiralty Court was trying to find some justice for the Grand Mughal and his family, but yeah, this didn't go well with the folks in India, and they were hoping that them being found guilty would patch things up between India and England, but they were acquitted the first time. This acquittal confirmed to the Mughal that England was he thought they were, a nation of pirates. Now, a second trial came up, and this was sentenced the pirates to hang. They were found guilty on the second trial. Henry's crimes were anything but ordinary, and it threatened the trade and diplomacy, but he still roamed free. He's one of the few pirates that was never captured after committing his crimes. Pirate biographer Charles Johnson suggests that Every died in Devon after being cheated out of his wealth. We don't know what happened. All we know is he got away, and that just adds to his status as being the king of pirates. I know I missed a few things. If you notice that I missed a few things about Henry Every's life, please let me know in the comments down below, and I will let everybody know where I went wrong. Well, that's the life and times of Henry Every. And if you have any suggestions on pirates that you want me to do on piratical history, just let me know. Put it down in the comments, and we'll go from there. Thanks for joining me for another week of piratical history with your host, Drew Abernathy.